Perfect. So, Stephen, we're getting started. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today at Hexnode Live. This is still very weird. It is weird just staring at the camera and taking these sessions. You think we'd get used to it by now, but nope, it's still very weird. Not seeing the person you're talking to in front of you, especially when it's a huge group like this, it's still very weird. But what the pandemic has done is bring us all so closer to each other, not physically, but in spirit. You have all been able to join us from the comfort of your home. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And this whole virtual situation has also helped me find my most favorite greeting so far. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you are joining from. Today is a very exciting day for us, especially the Hexnode team. We are at the inaugural session of our first ever event, Hexnode Live. This is our first ever Hexnode Live session. So for anyone who's not familiar with Hexnode events, we've been hosting a couple of events annually since 2020, since the pandemic hit. We have our annual HexCon, our partner summit, and in focus is HexCon, which is a global event which caters to thousands of people, thousands of professionals from all around the world throughout the year. And what we've understood from HexCon is that we're focusing on a lot of topics with hundreds of speakers that we have. And we thought that we'd get a bit hyper-focused and concentrate on some specific topics, especially some specific industries. And that's how Hexnode Live was born. And this time around, we are starting up with the healthcare industry, and which we feel like is very important in the aspect of data sensitivity and privacy and security and all that. So before we get into the topic and before I introduce Stephen, I would like to do our usual routine of housekeeping. So if you are familiar with our Hexnode webinars, you already know this. We will be giving out the recordings of these sessions within about 2-3 days after the event is over. Second thing, we will be having the Q&A session as usual. So Stephen will be taking in your questions after his session. I'll be monitoring the chat right here on my screen, and I'll be listing the questions that we have for Stephen, and he'll be answering that after the event. So make sure that you put in your questions throughout the session. Anytime you feel like something popping up in your head, you can just type that out in the chat, and we will be answering that live after the session. So I'll just introduce the topic. First, we'll be starting with cybersecurity threats and awareness in higher education, which will be taken by Stephen Fernald, professor at the University of Nottingham. And then we'll continue on to a panel session with 4 amazing speakers on the topic, preparing the education industry for the changing cybersecurity landscape. But first, we have the amazing Professor Stephen Fernald. So I'll just let you take over from here, Stephen.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Not sure about the amazing bit, but we'll see how things go. So let's see if the technology works and share the slides. Hopefully you're now seeing the slides, and that's there. You got me the thumbs up. That's good. Right, so topic for today's session, be it morning, afternoon or evening, is cybersecurity threats and awareness in higher education. So what I'm going to be looking at is, well, what do we face in higher education establishments in terms of cyber threats, and what do we need for, well, both staff and students in terms of awareness to help deal with them, and also thinking beyond, particularly for the students when they graduate from higher education, what do they need to know and be prepared to deal with in terms of cybersecurity in the wider workplace, and is education actually preparing them for that? So a few issues to discuss, and let's see how we go with it. So then, sort of stating the obvious a little bit, because I like to state the obvious, it's easy for me. So as elsewhere, as it says here, users in education, just as, we're using technology in education as we do in other discipline areas, we require a suitable level of awareness, some knowledge and skills to support what I've termed here good cyber hygiene. So enabling us to use our systems safely, to do things that will protect them, and to ensure that we're not doing things that leave us more exposed than we ought to be. So this helps to protect us as individuals, be we the members of staff or students within an education institution, and also to protect the institution more widely, because the way that individuals behave can obviously lead to safeguarding or exposure of the organization as a consequence. Now, if we think about the wider workplace, now I've got a little bit of evidence that will support this assertion as we go through, it often seems to be assumed that people, when they're going into the workplace, know about cybersecurity and can practice related hygiene already, or that somebody else is going to provide them with the necessary support to understand what they need to know. And so maybe that prior support is expected to have come from what they encountered at school or indeed at university. So it's interesting to consider whether the university environment, the focus I'm going to give here, is doing its bit to promote cybersecurity and to establish what good practice looks like, just for, if you like, lay individuals, not specifically those studying cybersecurity, but those who will nonetheless need to be aware of cybersecurity just for their wider use of technology. Now, what we do also find in the wider cybersecurity community, when you look at what's going wrong, the sort of incidents that occur, they regularly seem to get blamed on people, and you hear the term, people are the weakest link in cybersecurity. Now, you then get a lot of debate about, well, is that really fair? Are people actually the weakest link? Is it therefore? Well, fundamentally, people do seem to be a weak link in cybersecurity, but it's not necessarily their fault that they're placed in that position. Because if we've not supported them appropriately to understand what they're supposed to know, what they're supposed to do, and effectively how to play their part, then perhaps it's not surprising that they can end up being a weak link in the chain. And so, as it says there, many times users are characterized as a problem, but they've been left to fend for themselves. And so, well, what do we expect? So what I'm going to do during this presentation, I'm going to draw upon a source of evidence from the UK, our Cybersecurity Breaches Survey, which is conducted annually on behalf of the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, or DCMS, to give it its shorter name. And the survey is conducted by an organisation called Ipsos. And I've worked with them actually on the prior version of the survey, and I think I'm working on the next one. I didn't actually have any direct involvement in the one that I'm presenting to you, but it's still a good survey series, even though I wasn't involved in this particular one. So we'll get that clear there. So what the survey tells us, amongst other things, is the priority that cybersecurity is receiving or considered to receive in different organizations. And if you were to look up the breaches survey overall, and I've given you the URL there on the slide that enables you to get the full information, you'll find that there's a version of it that talks about the situation in businesses and in charities. And then there's a specific annex, which I've pictured there for us, which is referring to things that are going on in the educational space. So looking at everything from primary age, so the initial schooling, through to, well, what they've called higher education colleges, higher education institutions, or essentially meaning universities in this version of the survey. So first result here, if we look at it, is the extent to which security is considered to be a high or very high, fairly high or very high priority within the organization for different groups. So high priority for governors or senior management in the higher education institutions, 100% of the respondents said that was the case. Now, what I should also say at this point is the education annex is drawing on a relatively small sample of organizations compared to the wider breaches survey. So that, if I remember correctly, there were 34 higher education institutions that were surveyed. So it's 100% of 34. And in the wider survey, something like 1,500 businesses. So it's very different sample sizes, but nonetheless, what we seem to get is the best representation of the education space we can grab from this survey. So 100% say it's a high priority. 86% say that they update their governors or senior management about cybersecurity issues at least quarterly. So it's there on the agenda and visible to them. And 92% have somebody at the senior level who actually has designated responsibility for cybersecurity. So it's there being represented in that context. Now, all of these percentages are higher than the average percentage across businesses in the UK. So on this result suggests that the education space is representing the issue more strongly than the average business or indeed the average charity. So good news at this stage. And perhaps one reason for this is they actually need to, because again, looking at the extent to which organizations in education report encountering incidents, we can see that all of them at any level there, and you can now see it was 37 higher education institutions. I do apologize, I was 3 out there, but we can see there the sample sizes for the different groups being surveyed, and we can see the higher education colleges, as they called it in the graphic, or higher education institutions as they called it in the accompanying text, not being consistent with their reference. They mean universities. Almost all of them, 92%, have encountered some sort of incident in the prior 12 months, compared to not significantly less than half, but less than half of businesses in the UK. So we can see that there's possibly a reason why cybersecurity needs to be on the agenda, because it is actually being encountered as a problem. So if we try and look at this in a little bit more granularity, what we now see here is a comparison between third term, higher education colleges and businesses in terms of their encounters with specific types of threat. And so we can say, okay, for both communities, businesses and higher education institutions, phishing attacks are by far the most prominent type of issue. But we can then see higher education colleges, institutions having a higher proportion of encounters with all of the other types of incident as well. So things around, for example, viruses, spyware or malware, the survey's terminology, not mine, because to my mind, malware, malicious software, includes viruses and spyware, and it also includes ransomware, but that for good reason has been separated out there. So if we add together the ransomware and the other malware encounters, that's a significant proportion of institutions as well that are encountering that. And the reason I should say that ransomware gets separated is because it's a particular category of malware that's been quite prevalent in recent years, and the type of payload, i.e. holding your data and systems to ransom, is something that sort of calls itself out for special attention there. But we can see a whole range of different types of incident that have been encountered. And again, this is where they've recognized something in the prior 12 months. And again, recognizing now it is 34. So you've got a varying level of response from the institutions for different questions. So 573 businesses who'd recognized something and could characterize it, compared to 34 small sample higher education institutions. But nonetheless, still gives us some evidence that something's going on. So there is something to be concerned about. So, okay, we've got something to be concerned about. What ought we to do about it? Well, in the UK, another thing that we've got is our National Cybersecurity Centre. And one of the bits of advice they offer is around what are termed the 10 steps to cybersecurity. So this is a means for organisations to protect themselves across a range of different dimensions of cybersecurity that they ought to be concerned about. Now, one of these steps, so one of the 10, is called engagement and training, which is about engaging with the staff, ensuring awareness of what the issues are and what people ought to do about it. Now, if we look at this in the context of businesses, it's an area where historically they tend to do quite badly, at least according to the results from the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey. And so what that suggests, so a relatively small proportion of organisations being seen to be compliant with that step, providing awareness and training. So if I remember a specific figure from this year's Cybersecurity Breaches Survey about specifically the proportion of organisations, businesses, providing training for staff in the last 12 months for non-cybersecurity staff, so training for general employees, the figure was 17%. So less than a fifth of organisations providing some sort of cyber training for their staff in the prior year. And so what that suggests is, to me at least, that workers in the workplace might not be getting adequate cybersecurity training once they're there. So you might hope that they're already on message with it and understanding what to do, because the workplace might not be helping them to any great degree. Here are what the 10 steps more generally are. So this is an infographic from the National Cybersecurity Centre here, and I've usefully highlighted the step that I'm most interested in here, the engagement and training one. But we can see that it sits alongside 9 other steps focusing in different areas, from assessing your risk through to knowing how to manage incidents, and in the middle, things like having secure architecture and managing vulnerabilities, a whole breadth of cybersecurity issues. Now, if we look at how businesses are deemed to be compliant with this, here's the breakdown. And we can see that engagement and training, now I just told you a figure of 17% had provided training in the last 12 months for their staff. The reason this figure is higher is because it's also counting those organizations that have conducted some sort of mock phishing exercise, which I wouldn't necessarily say is really that much around training, but it is perhaps something engaging with staff in a certain way. But even there, we can see that it's just about less than a third of organizations doing anything that's counted as being engagement and training, whereas identity and access management, that's much more prominent, as is incident management. But many of the 10 steps in the business's context, it's less than half of them deemed to be compliant. If we compare with higher education institutions, and again, remembering it's based on a small sample, the results look significantly better in terms of the degree to which HEIs are doing something that brings them into compliance with the related steps. And we can see engagement and training here, 100% of them are doing something that is falling into that category. So either in this case doing mock phishing or having some sort of cybersecurity training for staff is the context here, not necessarily saying what they're doing for students. Again, quite a positive picture compared to, let's say, the business average. So if we look at how different types of education institution fared in terms of the having conducted cybersecurity training or awareness in the last 12 months, so that specific figure, and there's my 17% for businesses, we can see, again, it's 100% of the universities, the higher education colleges, as for whatever reason they've been termed here, and progressively less for the earlier stages of education. But in the university context, looks like a pretty good result. If that was me doing an assessment, I'd be fairly pleased with 100%, thinking about another aspect of the academic context, and certainly better than the average in a UK business. But, and there is a but, firstly, as I've mentioned, these results only refer to awareness raising provision for the staff community within the university. And as you may be aware, there are other people in a university. It's not just about the staff, even though we might like to think it was. No, there are students as well, and perhaps there's some utility in them being made cybersecurity aware as well. And it also doesn't mean, and hence my little graphic on the side there, it doesn't necessarily mean that the awareness and training was done well, or that it was effective in actually raising awareness or training people. And the reason I say this is, again, to sort of generalize from the experience I'm sure many of you will have had yourselves with cybersecurity training in your organizations as well. Depending on how it's provided, it can be to greater or lesser degrees effective. So oftentimes the training is you watch a video, you answer some questions, and you maybe do some simple tasks, sort of drag and drop the thing to the right place to show what needs to be done to protect it, or something of this nature. Not an extensive training program, not very much embedding of the knowledge, etc. So, okay, what that might achieve is raising awareness of the issue, but it doesn't necessarily enable you to ensure that somebody's going to be effective in dealing with things. So staff, and if they've been introduced to it in this manner, students may end up being more informed about cybersecurity and related threats, but would they necessarily be more capable? They might be, but you can't necessarily guarantee it. And okay, so let's use an example to some degree from my own institution here. So here's a message that I got at one point in time when I joined about doing some, as it says there, compulsory information security awareness training, rather a mouthful. So all staff at the UK university need to do it. And so there we are. That's the message. And it's going to take about 30 minutes, depending on what I know about the topic. Now, okay, as I say on the right-hand side, a few questions. Nothing necessarily wrong with this message or indeed the fact that I'm being asked to do some training. But a fundamental question might be, did I need the training in the areas that were being provided? Because regardless of what I already knew, this is being fired at me and I need to go through the same process as everybody else. It's not that I'm saying that I'm special. I'm saying, well, I am special, but in a different way. But it's not been tailored towards me here in any way. What did I already know? So did I need the training based on gaps in my knowledge or anything like that? Had I been trained elsewhere, because in actual fact, I'd done something very similar at my previous institution, and ultimately, as a result of it, was I more aware coming out the other side? Had anything changed? And so, okay, valid questions. And, to some degree, I found myself repeating the sorts of things I already knew, but I had to go through the process in order to, in a positive way, tick the box for the institution so that now Nottingham could be comfortable that I had received some security training, so I'd at least been told something, and therefore if I did something untoward, it wasn't for lack of being introduced to the issues. And then afterwards, I got a congratulations message. I'd completed the training, and there we are. Good on me. That's great. I feel that little bit more special as a result. But then, looking at the nature of the training itself, and here's just an example of a screenshot where, well, apparently I'm now needing to place myself in the position of advising somebody called Alan, who works for a small consulting firm handling vendor payments. So it doesn't seem to me immediately relevant to me as an academic in a university. I'm not necessarily expecting to find myself advising Alan or anybody else from a small consulting firm handling vendor payments. But this was part of the phishing training that was provided to me as a member of staff. So, as again, posing the question on the side, that does it feel like it's speaking to me as a member of staff at a university? No, it doesn't. It just feels like a generic training package. So if you want to engage me, if you want to engage other staff, perhaps having something that is framed in a way that relates to them might be the first step in the way. And where am I going to encounter this sort of scenario in my normal day-to-day job? I'm not likely to, was the point. So let's move on from Alan. And so thinking about the way that we provide security training, I have here, as you can already see, two fish as my reference point. So I've got the goldfish, which, well, as legend has it, has very little memory. And I've got a Babel fish, which is not a real fish. It's from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book series. If you've not read it, do so. It's a very, very good book series by the late Douglas Adams. I get no commission from it. Just read the book. The Babel fish translates things for you. So if you're hearing a language you wouldn't naturally understand, sticking a Babel fish in your ear apparently provides the translation. So why are these fish related to security training? Well, the typical way that a lot of security training seems to be provided is you do this annual security training program, you go through the process of watching the videos, answering the questions, and afterwards you're trained. That's it, you've done it. And perhaps you end up doing the same thing each year as a refresher just to make sure you're still trained. So, that perhaps as a recipient doesn't feel particularly useful. Don't assume I forget everything, keep telling me the same stuff. What I would prefer, which I certainly didn't get with Alan, for example, is presenting it to me in a manner that I feel relates to me and that I can understand. And doing that obviously takes a bit more effort, but it's likely to make the training feel more relevant and accessible to the recipients. Now, the thing that we often find as a great exception to this, as I say, is mock phishing. It's the thing that organizations tend to feel they're quite at liberty to do and like to do because it's something they can measure. And you can get a sense of whether people are susceptible to phishing attacks. And the earlier results from the cybersecurity breaches survey show us that phishing is a significant threat. So that's another reason why focus tends to end up here. But there are potential pitfalls to doing this if it's not handled appropriately. So it's not something not to do for sure, but realize why we're doing it, and also sort of thinking it through in terms of, okay, are we giving perhaps over focus on this and not giving attention to other things that people need to know about. So we don't necessarily want to end up in the situation of overfitting to a particular type of threat and leaving people susceptible to other things, because at the end of the day, it's not really about whether you recognize the wording of a message that's the key thing here. It's whether you recognize what the message is trying to get you to do. The important thing is the value of the data or whatever it is that you're being essentially asked to compromise. That's what we want people to be attuned to, not to whether the message is addressing them in a way that feels suspicious. Okay. So what we perhaps want to have in terms of getting staff and indeed students to buy in is to be able to answer these sort of questions. So, why does it matter to me, and what should I care about in this process in terms of cybersecurity? Is it my concern in terms of my role to handle it, or is somebody else doing it for me? Do I just need to know something? Do I need to do something about it? What's my part to play? Who's doing what? If it's me, what am I supposed to do? And how am I supposed to do it? And where, when, on what devices am I supposed to do it as well? So how does it relate to the different systems or devices that I'm likely to come into contact with? So again, it takes more effort to provide this level of support to people, but it's likely to be the way that gets them to buy in more sensibly. Now, if we think about the sort of things facing students, and there are particular things that students are likely to face. Phishing, we've established it's commonplace in higher education institutions, but for students, there could be particularly targeted approaches that go after things that students have. So their payment details, so that you're stealing their money, their university login credentials, so that somebody can compromise their account and find a route into university systems. Things specifically dressed up to trick them into parting with tuition fees or scholarship, fake scholarships that get them to part with, again, personal or financial information, and also the things that students do. So the use of, for example, file sharing and torrents, students using illegal services to get free access to movies, software, etc., which for the institution introduces the risk of introducing malware. So these are the sort of things students need to be aware of specifically. So if we think about where does this fit into a digital capabilities framework, and this again is from the UK, the GIST, the Joint Information Systems Consortium, if I remember correctly, they provide support on the digital side for the academic space. Here are the domains of their capabilities framework. Now, where does cybersecurity fit into this? It fits into the notion of data literacy, and it gets a couple of mentions there, but not in any detail to tell you, for example, what the practices of personal data security are, or what the security guidelines in collecting and using data should actually be. It's name checked, but it's not explained. So the sorts of things we often find ourselves doing in the sense of students or indeed staff are some practices like these. So I won't describe each of them, but the notions of people choosing weak passwords, not keeping their systems up to date, and so having security vulnerabilities, not backing up data, etc. All of these are areas of potential vulnerability. So what then would it be desirable for students to be told about? Not just those students studying cybersecurity, but students more generally in any discipline area, so they can be confident, safe users of technology. Well, you can find many lists of things that people ought to do, but I'll pick on this one from, again, the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK. The Cyber Aware campaign talks about these aspects as being key things that people ought to be able to do. So protecting email accounts, because email accounts are our sort of hub, if you like, where account recovery for other services we use often comes back to our email. So having the email properly protected is important. Keeping devices updated, using two-factor authentication on important accounts like email, enabling security features where they exist, having malware protection, firewalls to protect the devices. I won't read everything, but all of these things are important baseline hygiene things that we ought to be able to know ourselves, regardless of what we're using the technology for. So, although many of the organizations said that they were doing cybersecurity training, less than 2/3 of them were actually aware of Cyber Aware as a campaign. So directing students towards it might not have been so high on their agenda. So I say, if we think about cybersecurity in the syllabus, in terms of being taught, it has grown in significance. You get more specialist teaching about cybersecurity. In terms of cybersecurity degrees, we have recognized centers of excellence in the UK for cybersecurity education. But this generally is targeting students who've decided to study cybersecurity, or perhaps more widely computing, as their discipline. It doesn't address other disciplines and the need for students there to be cybersecurity literate. So many students, as I say, will enter university perhaps with limited cybersecurity knowledge and graduate in much the same state. So, students coming into university these days are much more attuned, I think, to general online safety, e-safety issues. But this isn't the same as cybersecurity. So e-safety tends to be more around things like cyberbullying, online grooming, etc. Obviously important issues, but we shouldn't conflate that with cybersecurity and assume that, oh, they've been taught about e-safety in school, so they know all the rest of this stuff. What we actually want to think about is, how do we get students to be cybersecurity aware? So simply directing them towards guidance, telling them that guidance is there, won't necessarily guarantee success. Many won't bother to look, and they still might have questions about, well, how do I do it? So the NCSC site has some information about that, but it doesn't substitute really for being shown. So what might we do, just the last few slides, in terms of different levels of provision that universities could think about providing? And really, it depends on what capability or appetite and desire the university has for doing this for its students. But there could be things like awareness campaigns, having peer-led initiatives amongst students. And we can think of a layered approach. So what I'll call the bronze layer is at least having a cybersecurity awareness campaign across the campus, aligned with something like, or maybe even directly using, in the UK context, cyber aware as your basis. And that at least is drawing attention to the issue. It puts it on the radar and gives people some means of recognizing there's something there to know about. Taking it a bit further, doing a bit more. Internal roadshows, pop-up events, opt-in training sessions, enabling students to be shown what to do and how to do it. So giving them more of a chance to engage with the topic. Perhaps students in the computing area, perhaps helping to support students in other disciplines. It's an opportunity for peer support. But the ultimate thing, I guess, would be integrating it within the curricula, not just in computing related curricula, but somewhere within the academic programs of study that any students are doing. And what that gives is then the chance of getting a genuinely workforce-ready cybersecurity literate graduate. So whatever organization they go into, they're going to pose less of a risk from the cybersecurity perspective. So conclusions. So hopefully we've shown the education sector is exposed to cybersecurity threats, so that can affect HEI itself and also the individuals within it. Addressing cybersecurity awareness for staff is important because we want them to be able to do their job in a secure and appropriate manner. And addressing cybersecurity for students, which seems to be done somewhat less routinely, supports them in staying protected during their academic period of study, but also, as I've used that term before, enables them to graduate workforce ready in terms of cybersecurity. And so with that, I shall stop talking and see if there were indeed any questions.
Can you see me, Stephen?
I can.
Amazing session, Stephen. I feel like it's not just with the education industry. I feel like one of the things about training is the one-size-fits-all approach that you mentioned. Often it is to check off the employees part of the list, in most cases for making some auditor of some compliance monitoring department really happy. I feel like you hit the nail on the head, especially with the big 5 questions. Yeah, absolutely amazing. So we will be taking some Q&As now. Before that, we are a bit tight on schedule, so we will be taking just a few questions, and we have a couple of comments as well in our social media or video and Zoom. So I think we can start with the first question is from Sarah. So Sarah asks, are these measures in place for schools to provide the necessary Are there measures in place for schools to provide the necessary basic information required for an individual to have good cyber hygiene? if not, don't you think there should be mandatory in some form? And I think where Sarah is coming from is in like cases like healthcare, there is HIPAA, which ensures that there is a basic standard for security in place. So do you think there should be some kind of governing body, or at least an auditory practice that is expected from the education industry as well?
Well, I think that there are some expectations, for example, in terms of schools as organizations, they're expected, as others would be, to be having baseline safeguards to ensure, for example, data protection, to be compliant with GDPR in the European context, for example, the General Data Protection Regulation, in order to ensure you're able to be confidently doing that. There are baseline security requirements you ought to be complying with. I think the issue, though, again, in terms of the awareness raising, and we can think about it for staff within schools, but also at different levels of schooling, whether cybersecurity is being introduced to the students, the pupils. If we think about younger levels, there is still no explicit standard there about what somebody is going to receive support into. There are plenty of sources that people can be directed to. So I use CyberAware as my reference point for the general adult population, but you can find, if you're dealing with, let's say, trying to engender understanding for younger children, for example, you can find age-appropriate cybersecurity tuition materials that can be used to help support them. And so I think it's a question of the institution being compliant, but also doing its bit to educate at each level as appropriate, so that people ultimately can transit through education, building their understanding of cybersecurity as a natural element of digital skills. It shouldn't be something that's separated out, that you can use a computer, you can do security, for example. It all ought to be wrapped into the same thing.
All right. So I hope that answers your question, Sarah. So we have another question. Hey, Stephen, we noticed that the secondary and primary education colleges put less effort into training and raising awareness. What can we do to ensure that training programs are successful for the younger students?
So again, I think it goes back a little bit to the element of what I was just talking about. I think, again, those results were likely to be reflecting the provision for staff within the environments. And so again, if you think about the size of the organizations concerned, so the results were likely higher for the universities because they're bigger organizations and it's therefore more significantly on their agenda. And that's parallel when you look at UK businesses of different sizes. So you imagine a primary school is smaller than a secondary school, is smaller than a university. And so you get less likelihood of there being the level of explicit provision. But again, if you're talking about providing the resources for the students there, it's again making sure you're doing something in an age-appropriate manner. You don't want to be talking to students about all the pupils about the technicalities. You're going to try and frame the risks and the problems and what they can do about it in the context of how they are encountering the technology. So it's very important to make it relatable. And its relatability relates to the age groups and the services they're going to be using.
Great. And also Greg notes that parents should also be educated properly, and I think that's a very valid point as well. And
No,
Greg
absolutely.
also has also raised a question. Have you noticed any changes in the cybersecurity outlook from students' part? Are they more aware? And I believe Greg is asking this based on like a generation thing. So maybe with the newer generation of students, have you noticed that the outlook has changed? The cybersecurity outlook has changed?
Yeah, so I think, so anecdotally, looking at how and talking to students, my sample group most naturally ends up being computing students and even more specifically security students. So they tend to know about things anyway because that's the topic they're studying in. But more generally, from what I pick up, you do have that sense of awareness that threats are there. Talking to teenagers, for example, they know about malware, they know about phishing, at least in terms of the word. words, but then there's not necessarily that connection. And why does it matter to me, so to speak? You know, it's a thing that they know about, but they don't really think, well, you know, my device, if I was to lose all the data on my device, I don't think it would matter. I'd ignore phishing. You know, what effect does it have on me? And they don't see that connection. So there's a level of, well, perhaps complacency, sometimes overconfidence that you tend to get from them, which, again, framed in the right way and explained to them in the right way about, no, what it actually means is this, and this is what could happen, and would you actually want that happening to you? If you can personalize it for them more specifically, the message sometimes gets across. But you know, the starting point is they use technology all the time. It's a natural thing, and they're ready to embrace the benefits and less cognizant of the risks.
Amazing. So we have a couple of more questions. We have already passed our time, so we just make this real quick. So Stephen, I am from India, with the UK and India having two very different types of cyber infrastructure setup, as well as the education systems being different. Would a similar roadmap to good cyber awareness and cyber hygiene work out over here, just as one you specified? And that, I think that's a very valid question, because would one, again, with the routine of training that we are setting up, would a one-size-fits-all approach be the best for everyone? Or are there similar things about the education sector which is being shared in all countries as well?
Yeah, so I think several answers. One size fits all, no, it's not going to work. I think what people need to know about what cyber hygiene looks like, those fundamental principles, that we could say is fairly consistent, you know, regardless of your geography or your educational framework. How you actually communicate that to people, what the opportunities are to get it in front of them, to engage them with it, that will differ depending upon the education system and the structure and the opportunities. So, you know, it's the fundamental material, let's say it's the same, the delivery style and mechanism needs to be adapted to suit the local requirements.
Amazing answer. And I think this is the last question that we can take in. So what is the difference in cybersecurity prevention between higher education industry institutes and businesses so vast? Oh, that was a why. I corrected that. So why is the difference in cybersecurity prevention between higher education institutes and businesses so vast? Since new forms of malware and ransomware emerge every year, shouldn't business take arguably more effort to be aware of new dangers to their infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally the reason why those statistics were so significantly different was because the result for businesses was averaging across the 1,500 different UK businesses of different sizes, and a fair proportion of those were micro businesses, small businesses, medium businesses. If I was to have extracted just the results for the large organizations, which would be the closer parallel, let's say, to a university in terms of the population of users and staff, then they would have been closer in terms of the percentage results. So around, I'm going to pick a number, but around 2/3 of large organizations, let's say, were probably doing or rather, get it right, were encountering incidents. If I go back to that chart where it said 39% of businesses overall, large organizations, larger proportion, and the reason they tend to be, you know, then a larger result is they're better placed to detect what's going on, and so they know about it. Smaller organizations often aren't aware of what's happening because they've not got eyes on it.
All right, so I think we can we do have more questions, so but we'll have to wrap up. So Stephen, there are still people joining in. So if you had to summarize the session, and if you had to give one solid advice to an IT admin from an educational industry coming in and watching the session to implement right away, what would that be?
Basically, I would say find a means to ensure that all of the users within your environment, be they staff or students, have a means of being advised on what they need to do as individuals to basically be cybersecurity literate and play their part in protecting themselves and the organization.
That is very solid advice indeed. So, Stephen, thanks a lot for spending your time today and giving us such amazing information. And everyone else, the second session, the panel discussion, will be starting in about a minute. So, tune in. Keep staying here. Get a coffee if you want to, and we'll see you in about a minute. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
And guys, we are live. So, once again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Yep, I just took that from the previous session, but that's all right. So once again, welcome guys, welcome to the inaugural Hexnode Live panel session. I am Sayud Santosh, brand strategist here at Hexnode, and I will be a host for this session. So all right, so it's back to school season, and if you're a parent, it's going to be a very busy week, with the early morning rush hour, getting the school bags and the lunch boxes, and more importantly, packing your kids off to school. And on the other hand, we've got the IT team, getting the devices and the workstations ready to go. Well, but we've heard about cyber attacks and how schools and universities are getting targeted, from ransomware attacks, privacy and data breaches, all the way to meeting invasions and Zoom bombings. And the list just keeps going on. So to answer the how, when, and whys of these happenings and some major practical steps to mitigate them, on today's panel titled Preparing the Education Industry for the Changing Cyber Landscape, I've got with me my really esteemed personnel who've got decades of experiences in cybersecurity amongst them. So once again, hey guys.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hello. Hello.
So, I'm just going to give like an introduction on each and every person. So starting off, we've got Sandy Silk, former director of information security consulting and education at Harvard University. Hey there, Sandy.
Hello.
I think, yep, audible. That's perfect. And next up, we've got Madeline Romano, manager of data privacy and cybersecurity at Lower Hudson Regional Information Center. Again, thanks for joining, Madeline.
Greetings from New York, everyone.
Next up, we've got Diana Barbosa, international cybersecurity education consultant, with a camera and the mic off. I'm really hoping she's not gone this time, is she? Nope, I think the net did, yeah. So we'll just wait for Diana, and meanwhile, we'll just carry on. Oh, and she's back. Dan, I was just giving you like a major, introduction till you, ghosted out at the last minute.
Oh, there we go again.
And
I like to make a grand entrance.
quite the entrance. So again, once again, welcome, Diana. Hope you and more importantly, your internet connection is doing well.
Yeah, now that everyone's had a chance to see me, I think I'll turn my video off, at least for a bit until it's my turn to speak. And that way I might be able to save this. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, perfect. And finally, we've got David Pura, Chair of Computer Science Department at Florida Southwestern State College. Hey there, David.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to sit with everyone. Thank you again.
I think that's the most number of, collective haze I've said, under a span of a minute. So once again, in today's discussion, basically we'll be covering the challenges faced in education, things we can do to improve, and some major important things that the IT admins, the students, teachers, and parents should be aware of in this new age of learning, I'd say. And before we get into the discussion, I just want to let my audience know this is a recorded session, and we will be sending the recording within 2 to 3 days max. And also do not hesitate to drop your questions in the chat, and I'm sure our panelists will be more than happy to answer our queries. And I guess let's start, right?
Sure.
So So starting off with David. So David, you worked in different industries before landing in education. So how do you think cybersecurity adoption is different in the education field when as opposed to some other fields, when you compare them to the others?
So as the education sphere continues to develop, it looks more and more like a business. And I think the main business behind what the education field is producing workers for the workforce. So therefore, they are preparing healthcare professionals, legal and law professionals, and most importantly, in my opinion, most important, information technology professionals. There's also a new set of challenges in education as opposed to other businesses where they're getting a huge rotation of users in and out every few months. And they have to meet the same kind of compliance that's expected for medical fields or legal fields, such as Sarbanes-Oxley, OSHA, and HIPAA compliance. And finally, I'd have to say, ultimately, I'd say between those two that they're really trying to do some of the other things other fields are doing, such as businesses, but having to comply within the same practices as many other fields where medical might have one subset of frameworks to work with. And
so I think Diana and Sandy, you guys had your fair share of experiences within the financial service industry. Again, the same question. So how do you think it's different from that to to the education industry?
Yeah, well, I think there's different culture, certainly. I've come from financial services, from investment, and there's differences, but there's the same. So those who were, say, the fund managers or portfolio managers at certain investment groups could certainly be seen as divas sometimes, and the rules don't apply to me. And I think you can see that oftentimes with, you've got the tenured professors or the rock star professors who are attracting lots of students, can also feel like rules don't apply to them. But you also have in financial services very accustomed to policy driven and compliance, where that's kind of new in areas like research, where you're not really inhibited by too many boundaries in how you think and how you want to share information. So it's just different culture to adjust to. And then research, you've got, virtual reality and augmented reality coming in that you didn't really see so much in some of the other more traditional businesses. So it's exciting, new things, and it's never a boring day.
Yeah, I would agree with what Sandy just said. It's just, I think in the education, there's more room for creativity and flexibility, which makes it riskier when you're looking at the cybersecurity perspective, right? Like when you're in the financial industry, like you said, there's policies, there's procedures that are very strict on what you do. There's certain applications that you can and cannot use. With education, we are forcing teachers to be innovative, to be creative, and then they go online to look for those tools to be able to meet those needs. And without the right information, they just put everybody at risk.
may I touch on that too? I know with the addition of virtual reality and pushing it into the education space, we're using that kind of framework to do hands-on tasks like car repair, building a computer. But in, like you said, the development and adoption of software, no one's evaluating the security of these softwares and rolling it out to students. And it's also not being developed in-house. So who really owns the rights of what's happening on those platforms is contingent upon the user agreements that may or may not be being read.
Well, I think someone could be evaluating it. It's just a matter of, do you have that process built enough that they're steering, it's getting steered towards the security group to evaluate it, and what's the criteria under which, what kind of data or what kind of functionality, what's okay to do on your own versus this needs to go through a vetting cycle. And then, you want to be seen as an enabler, not the speed bump that's going to slow everybody down. So yeah, it's a tough balance.
That's one of the things that's happening in the K-12 education area, because people don't think of K-12 as a business, as Michael said before. But what's happening is school districts have a plethora of data. They have students' data from kindergarten till 12th grade. So you have 13 years worth of a student's data. And the bad actors are now realizing that this is a really great lucrative market to go after. And they are looking at hacking into student information systems and other systems as well. And you don't even know that the data is being sold until the child is in, 12th grade and getting their first credit card. So it's really an area of concern. And then when you talk about the software applications, a lot of states are now enforcing laws and regulations about what types of software can be used and what the criteria that the vendors need to have in order to be operating in those individual states.
I think we'll get into that, a bit more in detail, regarding just how the information is being used, in terms of the student information, or how's it going to be used. So I think we've got Diana back once again. Hey there. I think you're muted, Diana.
Yeah, no, I'm good. My camera might come on and off, but I'm here the whole time. I can hear everything.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Perfect. So, Diana, you've spent, quite the majority of your career, with a major passion for cybersecurity education, right? Be it in the financial service industry, right to, implementing Canada-wide programs, or focusing on cybersecurity, right? So, again, when you think about, after the pandemic hit, I think it's safe to say most of them didn't have a proper idea how to set up remote learning, how to manage the devices giving to students. And it also didn't help that most teachers nor parents, had any idea, about these practices, or the cybersecurity and all that, right? So, on a rough basis, how do you think, or we can ensure the, cyber practices within the school, right? So when I mean schools, I'm including, the students, the teachers, as well as the parents. So, how do you think we can ensure, they start off there?
That's a big question, because how do we ensure it? I think Sandy and Madeline just touched on something around where the accountability lies. And, there should be things in place in order to be able to assess software apps, how ready people are to engage online, but there aren't. At least there's not consistency. And in the Canadian perspective, each province is responsible for their own education. There's differences provincially. Then there's boards within those provinces that are managed differently. Then you've got schools, then you've got teachers. It gets very complicated in that aspect. And one of the things that I've seen is that the huge inconsistency lies from when I was going across the country teaching cybersecurity to youth. We would get to schools where we could not even do the teaching because they were so locked down. They said cybersecurity means you're not allowed to download anything, you're not allowed to do anything, and we couldn't actually get the systems to teach the students. Then you'd get to other ones where teachers would say, oh yes, my kids are using A, B, C, or D, and I was like, oh my God, how did you even get those on the devices inside of the school? Right? So that inconsistency lies. So I think to assure safe practices, and best case scenario, at a very sort of government level, very policy, high level school level, there needs to be some kind of very clear processes in place, easy checklists for teachers. There needs to be education around how do you read a privacy agreement in a way that you'll understand it, right? You don't have to read the 40 pages, but there are some key things that you should be looking for to make things safe. Being very critical and analytical thinkers for teachers and for students, that just because something says that it's good for kids doesn't mean it is. We had an app that was being, widely downloaded here where it was being targeted for kids. It looked like a kids education app, but if you actually read the policy, it was not for anybody under the age of 16. So these are all things that need to be kind of put into place. As well as I think schools, from when you're looking at the IT professionals within the schools, is making sure that everybody knows what their role is. So if there's an incident, what is their role in managing that incident? We have a lot of talent, but sometimes they're all working a little bit siloed. Who's responsible for what? And that includes communication. Who's communicating to parents? Who's communicating, up the chain? Who's communicating to the teachers? what is the impact? We've had 2 scenarios in the last 2 weeks, one with the school board, one provincially. I don't know if it got sort of globally, like we had one of our major networks go down last week. You know, half the country had no internet access. And one of the biggest problems and what's going to kill that organization's reputation is the fact that they were not able to communicate effectively. So that needs to happen in order to put, you know, teachers, students, parents at ease as well. And I don't think it's easy to do, but there needs to be a bit of not just consistency, but also a part of it that is what I call ingrained. I don't think cybersecurity is a nice to have anymore. I keep calling it a life skill, just like you teach your kids swimming or anything else. We can't continue to talk about cybersecurity as something separate. We're living in a digital-based economy where everything has a digital component. Cybersecurity and safety needs to be part of every conversation instead of an add-on or something that, oops, oh yeah, let's talk about that, or oh yeah, let's manage that. It needs to be part of basically everything that we do and everything that's taught in the schools, both from a learning perspective and an administration perspective.
So like, what do you guys think? Like, you know, what's your take on this? David, what's your take on it?
I would agree. I think that from my perspective, as like where I sit as an educator, that there is above me so many different barriers and levels that affect not just my ability to perform or execute in a timely manner, but also to manage effectively standard and good practices. And I don't think that's just like my issue. I think that I agree with there needs to be some kind of vetting process or some kind of assessment to effectively document and track what kind of softwares are being used, technologies being used, how they're being used, and most importantly, who's using them. And I'm not so sure that those have been standardized across our education sphere as a whole. But I also think that the way information is traveling as fast as it is and the way actions take place, that, as Diana suggested, like IT is no longer secondary. It is, especially in terms of cybersecurity, something that like the new generation, they already know. What the new generation's learning in middle school, high school is stuff I had to pay for in college to learn. And that was just a few years ago, right? So they're coming up with like a whole new set of solutions and problems that we're going to need the frameworks and standardizations in place for to best prepare for.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. Again, so when I was at Harvard, and I was there for 6 years leading the group that did the security and awareness training and also consulted. So we were in the central and we consulted to any of the professional schools there about risks or projects that involved high risk data or high risk functionality. I think a huge part of it is being approachable as an information security professional, as a team. And it took us a while to be able to get out with an awareness program that had, okay, for the majority of students, employees, this is all we expect you to be able to do. You know, we expect you to be able to use multi-factor authentication that we vetted a long time to make sure it was easy to do. We couldn't ask people to do something hard. You were going to be faced with failure. So, you know, we had to go and from like a human interface design kind of look to see, what am I asking people to do? They're not vested in it the same way I am. You know, what's their motivation and what's their patience to carry this thing out? So, you know, if you're asking someone to send files in an encrypted manner, they don't need to know the history of encryption. They just need to know, here's the easy way to do it. Use this program to go here. So, you know, you need to develop the human use cases. What are people trying to do? What's the easy way to do it? And also have that bedside manner, because when things go wrong and you want people to come to you, it's an incident and we need to respond now. We're not going to be judgy. We're not going to tell you how stupid you were for doing something. You know, like, okay, how do we make this better? Work with me, tell me what you did. So, you know, I think the people skills are so undervalued historically within information security. You know, we have to be there at the worst time for people typically. So we need to be approachable, and we need to give them reasonable solutions to challenges they have.
You know, and Sandy, when you were talking about like the encryption thing and everything, one of the things that I've learned when I'm working with the school districts is if you explain to people why they need to do this, all of a sudden they're like, oh, you know, that if you have a child's special ed folder, you don't want it to email directly to somebody else without it being encrypted. And the reason you want to encrypt it is because the information could go out and be exposed on the internet. So we talk about building a culture, and we used to talk about cybersecurity awareness, and now we talk about appreciation and understanding, and we try to make sure that we relate the work that we're doing to their personal life as well, because you can be just as easily phished at home as you can be in your work email.
And you know, IT people are the worst at being phished, right? Because we're trying to do everything so quickly, and then we're trying to get through our email. Like, we can have the worst click record of any group. You know, and we know right afterward, we're like, oh my gosh, I just fell for that. Everybody clicks. Everybody has a bad day. You know, you just hope you were on your phone and not on the network when you did it, so that it's not affecting something else. But, you know, put yourself, and Madeline, to your point, you know, like, okay, we've all sent something to the wrong recipient. If it was encrypted and it went to the wrong person, you know, then they probably were not set up to retrieve it. So that's a safety. Or if you do it through a share, you can just kill their access, because you know what? We all make mistakes, which is probably our worst record of incidents out there is human error. Protect me from myself.
So I think the mistakes part really resonated with me, because just last week, you know, more or less my dad, he had sent me a link saying, you know, sign up for this, you know, it was a web page which said like, you know, sign up, give your email and your name, and, you know, you're bound to get your free iPhones. So my dad, being the innocent person that he was, he did that and he sent it to me, and he was like, you're going to get like free iPhones, so just sign up for this. So I was like, Dad, no. This is where you messed up. And that's why mainly I resonate with what David had said regarding the generation gap in terms of the cybersecurity, because our coming, you know, our generation, you know, the youths, you would call them, you know, they know all of this, but then, you know, there's a huge gap when you explain all the big cybersecurity and all that, you know, to the middle-aged or senior citizens, right? So, you know, do you guys have any idea, you know, how to bridge the gap so that, you know, they would also realize, okay, fine, you know, rather than being it, you know, making cybersecurity sound like, as you mentioned, you know, separate thing.
I think Sandy touched on it with really demystifying it and not being competitive and approachable, so that any generation really can have open communication and dialogue to formalize their understanding of how something works or why they should be doing it. Because yes, they should be doing it, but they're going to ask questions. They're going to want to know why they should dedicate their time. What's the incentive for it? And so making sure that we can have spaces really to have those conversations, whether it be like a town hall or a workshop like this or a meeting. But sorry, I think Diana wants to say something.
No, that's fine. I was going to say, one of the things that I did when I was running the program, and I encourage people to continue to do, is when you are teaching youth to do this, we would always finish a class to say, when you get home, share this information with your parents and get your parents to share this information with their parents, right? And then that actually works in two ways. One, it helps to, you know, get them to remember the information. That there's no better way to learn something than to teach it to somebody else, right? It gives them a little bit of power, I guess, of, oh yes, I know something and I can now share this knowledge as it goes through. But it really is that ripple effect, and hopefully opens up those conversations at home. I'll tell you now, even as somebody in cybersecurity, I have never had a cybersecurity conversation with my own mother. I have told her, be careful about this, be careful about that, but she's not somebody who wants to engage in conversation about technology. I hope though that I have taken enough steps, she, you know, that she knows now not to click on certain things. But otherwise, you know, she would be sending money.
We lost.
Have we lost Diana? For a second, I thought it was my headphones.
I thought it was me too. We lost Diana.
Unfortunately, we've lost Diana to a really bad net connection.
I do agree with what she was saying though. Like I don't have conversations with my parents asking, how long is your password? Do you use MFA? Like, and those are actually probably conversations we should be having. Making sure, hey, do you guys know what something like zero trust policy is, and how important that can be for something like their finances or the information that they have on not just themselves, but members of their family that need to be secured, that if you're like the head of house, that you should be thinking about.
Yeah, and I think it's that you have to make things achievable, you know, set people up for success. I'm just thinking, you know, my husband's not yet using a password manager. Like, I've been using a password manager for years. I don't know what any of my passwords are except the one to get into the password manager, and oh my gosh, if I ever have to type them, they're impossible because they're long, complex things, but I never have to type them. But to tell someone to start using a password manager, suddenly they think they have to spend a weekend putting all their passwords into the password manager. And you're like, no, just download the password manager. And then as you log into things, it will remember it for you. But to say this is achievable, just put one password in and then start using it, and it will help and it will do the heavy lifting for you. You know, I think there's just the fear of this is going to be long and hard and complicated, and I'm going to get it wrong and feel defeated. And so we need to set people up for success by saying, just do this one little thing, and then we'll move forward. You know, the idea of zero trust is like, oh my gosh, this is huge. You know, okay, just look at one thing, and how would you improve that?
And I think when you're looking at education, we're asking teachers to do yet another thing, right? So mark these exams on your, you know, during your time, plan for tomorrow's session. Don't forget, you know, to bring in Kleenex boxes. And now, can you please make sure you read the privacy policy before you do this? So I think, Sandy, it's a great tip when you're talking about breaking things down very slowly. Madeline, you talked about, you know, making them sort of achievable things, one step at a time, and like I said, and making them part of every conversation, as opposed to, you know, here's another course you have to take, here's another lesson you have to do, and keeping it to the minimum. Because I managed the bank's mandatory training for a long.
Yeah, we lost you again.
I think it's a recurring theme right now, isn't it?
Well, you know, just to add on to what Diana was talking about, it's about, you know, when computers first came into the classrooms, there was a computer lab, and you would go to the lab and it would be something separate. And then we learned, no, you can't just teach word processing in isolation. You should teach it as part of a lesson about maybe desktop publishing at work or programming, and you connect it to the science fair. So now it's a matter of taking those same things about incorporating computer skills and incorporating cybersecurity awareness skills into everything in a lesson. It shouldn't be, you know, just separate from everything. It should be combined and embedded in the curriculum as part of it all, and not something left to the tech directors to teach.
Absolutely. And from what it suggests too, is like some of those skills are not strictly for an IT major or discipline. Like now everyone has to do it. Doesn't matter what discipline or field you plan on going in, you're going to need to know typing skills, how to save files, where to store them, how to store them. And with that comes the subset of cybersecurity policies and procedures that should be known offhand at that point.
And it's in their personal life as well as their school life and their professional life. And that's when you make those interconnections, it becomes more apparent to people.
We've been talking about this too and suggesting like the security policy procedures and the management, but one thing we also haven't hit on is that the number one exploiter is typically someone you know, or someone within the framework of where you're working, right? It's also not some kind of exterior scary like factor or hacker that exists somewhere. No, it's someone relatively close. And so that's the real reason why keeping your information is so important to be secure, because someone generally close to you is going to find it and know how you access it, so they're going to pick up on that and take advantage and exploit it.
Because I think you had mentioned in one of your research, you had mentioned like the social conditions that breed cyber threats, right? So again, when in terms of education field, what do you think are these conditions, or what are these factors, that contribute to these?
So looking at cybercrime, I don't think it's so different from crime. So in terms of a condition that would breed this kind of instability, this influx, it would be economic kind of tensions or conditions that force someone to go and do malicious activity. Because from my experience, it's on average, the typical person does not want to wake up and do harm or bad. They want to do good or do what they need to survive without harming anyone else. But until they're pushed into some kind of condition where they feel it's necessary, that's when it becomes a problem. And this catch-22 with that is that it's not just an economic issue. That's also tied with a moral and social values related to wherever the individual is coming from. How is their culture affecting them, shaping their idea and understanding of themselves? It's not good, for instance, to be in a society that rewards criminals and idolizes criminals in Hollywood, right? And suddenly people are wanting to grow up and be like this James Bond kind of criminal, when reality of it, that's a really bad person. We don't want that. And so the combination of those will develop into the archetypes for criminals. But I think in education, having the understanding and the accessibility to do harm in malicious activity is becoming easier and more accessible to individuals.
It's been interesting as well to see, though, in those kind of attacker communities, so those professional, those who are writing the ransomware attacks that they're going to sell, like ransomware as a service, there is kind of honor among thieves lately. So the ethics now, they're like, we are not going to sell you this kit to do a ransomware exploit if you're going to be pointing it at a hospital. Like, we do not want people to die from lack of availability of services. So it is interesting when I can remember seeing news about, oh, there's a Bluetooth exploit for a pacemaker or an insulin pump or something, which could kill someone, which is horrible. But not downplaying that, but the type of person it would take to get close enough to somebody to execute that and watch them drop in front of you. That's not many people, so you think of, yes, it's possible. Who would cross that line to do it? And what would it take? What kind of a personality would it take to do this? So the same with attacking like a hospital. It's just, you do have to think about, and David, you mentioned, am I breaking a law? Am I causing physical harm to a building or to a person? Where violence, like what's the line I'm not going to cross?
And I think what people are starting to realize is, like you're saying, there's a business. This has become a business. You have the people who are the bad actors for hacking into systems, and they just get the thrill of hacking into a system. And then they turn around and sell the data to somebody else who wants the thrill of utilizing that data for exploiting, identity theft or so on. So there is honor among thieves, but there's also a business hierarchy too to this area, which is another fascinating thing.
Yep, and they work this 40 hours a week or more, just like we do, and they know our holiday weekends. So you can always count on a Friday at 4 o'clock of a holiday weekend is when you're going to get some alert that something's going wrong in a system, because they know you're going to have less people available.
Right.
So I think, go ahead.
No, David, I was just checking if, Diana is still there. I think she's still there. Is it?
I'm here.
All right, great. So yeah, David, you were about to say something. Yeah.
Pass. The thought left me.
All right. So then, okay, fine. If that's the case, we'll just move on. And Sandy, I think this one's coming for you. So like, how do you think are the, risk tolerance levels, how different is it as we move from, K-12 education, as we go higher further to like, say, colleges and universities, is there like a different strategy in terms of, IT, when you compare to a school, and then when you compare to an, institution or a college, what's the major difference over there?
I'm not sure it's necessarily from one, say, age group to another of education. I think it really depends on what's the portfolio of IT, OT, Internet of Things that you're managing in your environment. If you're a prep school and you have on-site, on-campus dorms, you're going to have the same life safety concerns as a college or a university that has resident students. If you have research data that's being funded from federal grants or from Department of Defense, you're going to have to meet certain requirements for protecting that. There are just, if you run a hospital or a medical center on the university, you're going to have not only FERPA, but HIPAA requirements. So I think we're all navigating the same. It's just, what do you have? There are some universities that run airstrips, that run nuclear power plants. They've got different risks than others that don't. So it's really knowing what's in your environment. And, it's going beyond confidentiality, integrity, availability to safety, reliability, and even trust. So, it's become more than just the information as the cyber is connecting to the physical world. You really have to think what's being monitored or controlled remotely, and what does that mean to the physical aspect of everything we do, in addition to the information.
So do you guys have anything to add on to that? I think Sandy was like, she was pretty unclear. So do you guys have any, anything else to add on?
I think that's also going to be one of the bigger challenges in adopting compliance or figuring out the standards for different facilities, businesses, fields, whatever they are, if they work with nuclear or not, is identifying this new type of mentality that we're seeing, where it's not just what security practices we can use, but who's using them. So now we have to unroll a new vetting process for individuals to join organizations at, whether it be a DoD level or a community college level. The information is so sensitive. It's more than CIA now, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and the data at rest and data in motion that we're concerned with. We have to focus on the individual themselves that are working in the institution, and how they're operating.
So I think when Sandy had mentioned, nuclear and stuff, one major thing that stuck out to me was, to have all of that, I think there's a certain amount of budget, that's been allocated, right? So like, how much do you think, budget plays a role? Is it like a major, do they play a major part in cybersecurity in education? Like, what's your take on it?
Always, absolutely. I personally feel that education is viewed as a business, if anybody else here agrees with that. So when you're looking at a business, you're looking at a timeline of services, a timeline of products, the cost for those, the implementation and rollout, and then what can actually be left out of the product, right? What's not a priority, what's not going to break the system. And so there are things like risk analysis to make sure that like proper cybersecurity measures are in place, but we're just now getting to a point where we think and realize that we need to implement cybersecurity in the development cycle itself. So it hasn't been up until this point. So now we're going back and have to iterate and re-implement cybersecurity in necessarily like layers of the system, of the network. And that has a great cost. It's a bit of a catch-up cost. And then with new attacks, new vectors coming out every day, there's a continuous upgrade cost as well, a continuous training cost for the individual having to learn the software for the institution to maintain and manage it. And it's becoming something that needs its own budget, in my opinion. It should no longer just be something inclusive in IT budget, or if it is, it needs to be very clear how it's not just IT, that this is actually for security, for future proofing.
So, David, I agree with you that education or K-12 should be considered a business, but unfortunately, the educators don't necessarily see it that way.
They have to pay us more.
Yeah, and what we have happening is there are now a lot of states are setting in place data privacy and cybersecurity rules and regulations, but they're unfunded mandates. So a school budget is locked in every year, and districts work on, in New York at least, zero-based budgeting, so they cannot hold funds over to the next year. So all of a sudden, they have these requirements they have to put in place, and they say, well, you're just going to have to make do with the money that you have. So it's new textbooks for kids or new cybersecurity measures, and they have to weigh the funding that they have. And it's time that we need the government to help step in and provide some additional funding to do this if we're going to protect the systems and the data in the schools, because the schools often don't have the money they need to do the proper thing. And that's the part that we struggle with.
No, I agree. And I think that's creating a big problem. Sorry, Deanna, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree and say that's the same in Canada. That's no different.
I think the big problem we're seeing though, is like in the United States, what we have 50 states, right? With so many colleges per state, there's not really a standard for these cybersecurity practices. Like, I know in Florida, we have like 8 colleges, but my college is different than every other college, not in just what we teach, but what's available there, and those policies and procedures that school is using and adheres to. And so I think that's a discrepancy that needs to work itself out to a certain extent. And it slowly is.
In New York, we have 752 school districts outside, and that's outside of the big 5 cities, which are New York, Yonkers, Rochester, Syracuse, and I always forget the 5th one. And we have the state saying you must do this, but then they have to figure out how to do it, because that's how we work things here, and that's how it is in a lot of other states too. So there's standards, but then how do you reach those standards is the struggle, and how do you find the money to get there?
Yeah, and I think if you add into that the technical debt that so many of us are facing with, legacy systems that they're not working well, and like student information systems where, security should be a part of the reason to upgrade, but, you also think of, well, what's the better processing and the efficiencies we can gain from it, but then it's, well, who's paying for it? Is it IT? Is it admissions and financial aid? Who's paying for this core enterprise app that's going to be expensive and painful to put in, but it's going to be better for everybody. But we don't plan for that long-term care and feeding and then renewal of the technology. And and unfortunately, even a place like Harvard, there's no endowment for it for security. That you want to have a named professor who will teach computer science, but we're not going to have money just given to the IT department to improve a system. So it has to.
I think that's big of I think that's a major concern. I think, when I mentioned budget, I think every single person had like a small smile over there, because I think that kind of, just says it all. I think, be it the schools or the universities, I think, that remains a major issue, I feel. So how do you think we can actually, what can be done about it? Because I think it's, as you guys mentioned, it's no longer a separate entity, right? Like we have to have this, going together. So something has to be done about it, right? So how do you, how do you think, it should be done?
Leverage incidents.
Yeah.
Fear, you hate to say FUD, fear, uncertainty, and I forget what the D is, but it's like, look, they just got hit and got taken out. You're like, we could be next if we don't do something. There's no difference between them and us. It was just dumb luck. They got hit and we didn't. So, unless, do you want to pay ransom or do you want to, do better backups?
Yeah, districts that have had incidents now have budgets to take care of these things. So maybe you want to be the neighboring school district and not the one who had it, and that might help. But that's part of what it is. And, and I also think it's important to get to the school boards and the superintendents of the districts, because your tech directors, your teachers, even your professors, whatever it might be, they understand the need for it, but it's the superintendents and the school boards that need to understand the value and the need, and they're the ones who have the money that they can channel into that right direction. But whenever I do a session on cybersecurity and data privacy, and I invite the superintendents, unfortunately, they usually send their tech directors and their curriculum folks, because that's their business to worry about. And we're like, no, we want to talk to you as a super, because we want you to understand how important this is.
It's interesting that you say that, Madeline, because I've done talks to, again, like teachers and director levels, and I always have them coming after to me and saying, can you speak at the board level? Can you go talk to like the people? I'm trying, I don't have the money, I don't have the support, because they just don't understand. Can you go talk to them? And rarely am I able to get in front of them.
Right. They keep sending the tech directors to us and they don't go. So we really need to try to get in front of those people, because they're the ones who can really make a difference.
I would agree with pushing for higher in the administrative level at the school boards and districts. And then Sandy also touched on something with government spending, and there needs to be lobbying, or maybe it was Madeline who also said that, but there needs to be a push at your governor level for them to go lobby for your district, for them to understand that their kids might be affected at their school, or even at their doctor, right? Like, because it's a community, everything trickles out at the institutions and the greater community. And speaking on that, we're seeing a push for resources coming from other businesses and local employers who would want our students or students to enter into their workforce to kind of like sponsor and produce the funds or additional resources to provide technology, software, things students can use as tools or to help improve these infrastructure systems. And that's also a possible solution. I don't think it's an end-all be-all solution, but together, I think leveraging the lobbying, the push in the districts, and the local community together can be a really, really effective solution.
That's perfect. Again, I think this one's coming for you, Diana. So again, I think in the last 22 months, I guess, has shown us like the biggest transition that we've seen, right, from in the education, right from using books and pens and papers all the way to tablets and laptops and computers. So again, majority with this digitalization, and apart from that, there's been on-site, remote, and hybrid scenarios as well, right? So when the transition is being made, what are the major things, or what are some of the things that the IT admins would have to keep in mind when making the switch from on-premise to say cloud, and also while they're implementing the ed tech or the cybersecurity tools?
I think it's the same for both, and it's get really clear on what you're trying to achieve, right? And make sure that you've got, even think about the metrics. How are you going to measure that what you're doing is what you needed, right? How are you going to know that it's successful? And that might take making decisions on, do we need to migrate everything or don't we? A big conversation that's happening in Canada here, and I'll refer back to the outage that we had, was the fact that everything went to a standstill. Nobody could do anything because they couldn't access the internet. So is there any information that you need to keep on premise, because God forbid something happens and you can't access it on the cloud? Right. So an example of that is maybe you put all the education apps up on a cloud, but vital student information or vital things that you like attendance record for the day, stay in-house, whatever that may be. The other thing is looking at piloting. Right. So consider doing pilots instead of, putting all your eggs on one basket and going out and making a huge investment if you're not clear on what your return on investment is going to be. Try to migrate something, see how that works, go from the process, learn from it. before you do everything else. And then I think also a big mistake that sometimes is made is that they don't take full advantage of the support comes with the cloud provider. So they've got engineers, they've got support there. A lot of those times, those people just end up kind of attending meetings, but not being able to give the the input into what they need to. So allowing, IT as an IT professional, know that you're good at this, but there's people who are experts at that, and being willing to listen to that and get that support, because they may have faced things that others haven't. And the other thing is, we talked about the fact that different school boards, different states are all at different levels. Seek out those school boards who have had an experience, who have done a migration. Maybe it's happened in another state, in another country. Have conversations, get references about your provider, talk to them about their challenges, talk to them about their successes. It's that real sort of life experience stuff that I think that we need to take more advantage of and learn from. Anything else you can Google, right? Everything else you can Google and get information from, but actually talking to people who have had that experience and learning from that.
I would agree with her. Having those conversations really alleviates the anxiety and concerns that maybe an individual might have with moving from on-premise to a cloud, and demystify some of those concerns, like, do I need to move the entire premise to the cloud? No, you don't do that at all. You can start with something small and slowly iterate and increment and work into a fully scalable cloud solution. I don't know if anybody else agrees.
And I think one of the wonderful things about the education community is we do help each other and speak with each other and share information. I mean, if I think back to financial services, there was no way Fidelity and Schwab were going to get on a call and be like, oh, what were the pitfalls you had when you moved to this new technology? But Harvard would talk to Stanford, and to Penn or whatever, to say like, okay, we're trying to do this. We know you did it. What were your pitfalls? So the education community is just very much helpful to each other. We have had learning experiences. We want others to have aha moments and avoid pitfalls. So, use the network that way. It's wonderful. It's refreshing.
We've seen a big change in the K-12 side of things as well, because, about 7 or 8 years ago, if a district had some kind of a data breach, it was very hush hush and nobody wanted it in the news and nobody would talk. And then it became more and more apparent that it was happening more frequently. And there were a couple of superintendents who said, you know what, I'm going out and I'm talking to the world because I want other school districts to learn from what happened to us so we can help them to protect their systems. And we now have a whole network of superintendents, and that's where the superintendents get involved, because now they got hacked. But, there's a network, there are services, there are consortiums. In New York, we have regional information centers that provide this regional advice on how to do things and support. So it is very different from, like, say, the financial world where they won't share. But in education, I think there's a lot more sharing going on.
I guess it's like, it's just, as simple as, talk to someone and, just get help, as simple as that. And I just realized, we're about, we are at the end stage of our panel session, and one more question, from my side, and then we've got the Q&A. And so if you guys got more questions, please be free to ask your questions. And, this one's going out, as a general question for all of you guys. So I think ultimately one of the major things, the root cause of a breach, I think I would say, is the human error. It's been the case in numerous data breaches that's occurred. And also the best way to reduce risks caused by people inside the organization is by limiting the access they have to the organization's resources. But what % of educational institutions do you think would implement IAM, right? And apart from IAM, we've got newer technologies, like we mentioned, zero trust, which enhances data security, right? And more importantly, how capable do you think the universities or schools, their IT department, they would be, how capable are they to adopt, say, these technologies like IAM, or say even UEMs and ZTNA? And Yeah, I think it's a lot of questions, right? So you get the gist of it.
I'm laughing because it's not an IT issue. You know, IT can put the rules in place for you, but we can't tell you what the intended business flow of everything was supposed to be. And this role should be able to do X and only X. And if they try to do this, this is a high risk transaction and that requires a second account to approve it. That's business. And we need to be talking to business, with business, to understand so that we can put the rules in place that they want, whether it's whether you call it identity access management, zero trust. You know, these are platforms that can support the rules, but we can't define the rules. We need business to talk with us, and we need to support business with the right rules.
You know, I'm listening to what you're saying, Sandy, and on the K-12 side of things, you know, you have your network administrators that might have different levels of access to certain parts of running the network, but you also have your folks who are running their data warehouse or running the student information system or running the financial systems of the school district. So you get to the business rule side of things, where you want to have least privilege access to certain parts of systems. But so there's really two levels. There's the technology side of things, but then there's also the business rules of the functioning of the systems that are being used. Even on the instructional side, you know, does every teacher need access to every student's data? No, they only need access to the students that they're working with. So therefore, you would have some kind of business rules to set up that kind of access level too.
So overall, they are very, very important, in implementing them, I think we agree. But I personally, being professor, I get excited for the opportunity to like imagine that like I'm just going to get grants and all the money, and I'll be able to develop like a nice student research project where the students are all developing their own VPNs to use and roll out into the real world and share with the community. But that's not really the reality of it. But at the same time, those are the future workforce members that are going to be put out in the community, working on the next set of IAM and how that's going to be defined at the business logic level, what mobile device security really means, or, you know, is zero trust really enough, right? Or do we need no trust? Like absolutely none, like, or yeah, so being at the institution, having the ability to research and really develop what comes next, or kind of get that forefront of what's possible for security coming down the road in the student minds, and ability to implement business practices or software solutions is tremendous.
And let's not forget the human factor. You know, that 95% of the breaches and the hacks are caused by human error. So even if you have zero trust, and even if you have business rules, and even if you have all these other things in place, all it takes is one person clicking on some bad email that will just break through all those other ways of protecting the systems.
When I first started, one of my jobs prior to getting to Harvard, I was, you know, helping review their website for security awareness. It was, I forget if it was in production yet or not, doesn't matter, right? And I was very new, hadn't worked in this platform before, and I swear I deleted the whole thing. Like at like 5 o'clock at night, I'm panicking, I'm reaching out to people, I'm thinking, why did you give me delete access to this thing? Turned out it was just a view I had changed, so it was still there. But, you know, again, that human error, I'm like, undo, where did it go? And thinking who gave me this amount of privilege in here? I should not have had it. But yeah,
that power.
Yeah, it made me feel horrible, and you know, made of course the person just laughed because they knew what happened. But yeah, I mean, you know, you're making a person feel horrible for a mistake when, you know, maybe it could have been avoided by not giving them that much access.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's it from my side, but okay, fine. I was just checking out the Q&A. We have quite a bunch of questions. So
Oh, no.
I'm hoping you guys have Yeah, I'll try filtering out, some of the major questions, and you guys, I think, you guys should be able to handle it. So starting off from Sarah Williams, what are some of the steps we as parents could take to ensure security for our children on the internet? So who's going to take that?
So understanding what's available to you as a parent as tools for internet security is like the first thing you can do, and having basic setups with like antivirus software, making sure your operating system's scheduled for regular updates and maintenance, so that it keeps a record of what the latest threats that have been detected are and how to like prevent them, that kind of thing. And then using control-based access, depending on how old your child is, like if you have like a toddler, right, using control-based access on an internet browser to prevent them from really touching anything that would be adult content, or something, even, something you wouldn't want 10, 11, 12, 15-year-olds looking at, right? Or changing the settings for like safe search. Those are options.
And also being proactive in terms
Mhm.
of teaching them good cyber hygiene, teaching them
Yes.
about, password length, password confidentiality. Don't put your password on a sticky and stick it onto your keyboard. Those kinds of best practices that we're trying to teach other people to do. You're never too young to teach your kids this as well. And that will help protect them when they're using the internet also.
Yeah, and I was going to actually say something like you just said, Madeline, it's never too young to start having those conversations, start teaching them the vocabulary.
You cut out.
I think you said vocabulary.
Yeah. I mean, it's a new channel of communication, but it's the same kind of communications in the physical world.
Like by the park. To talk to them about the dangers in cybersecurity and opening up those conversations.
So yeah, Sandy, you were saying.
I would just say, the translation of stranger danger, whether it's in the physical world or the cyber world, right? The concept's the same, and it may seem less dangerous online, but there is the confluence of online and real world. So I'd say that the same tenets that apply in the real world apply in the cyber world.
I think, especially when I was playing growing up, I had to learn that someone I'm communicating with online can find out my address. Like they can actually find out what city I'm in and like my physical location. And then I know that's not common knowledge to parents and the general populace, but yes, if there's like a video game or a communication channel like AOL, right? The other person on the other end, if they find out enough information about the other person, can go and search you. So that's also something that good hygiene, right?
Right. Teach them not to be in chats or conversations with anybody that they don't know, because you just don't know what somebody is doing or what they're disguising themselves as.
We've got a couple of questions, but I think we've got only time for one more question. But we'll be sending rest of the questions, your reply, the answers through email. So we've got time for one more question, and I think Ruse asked a question. I think it's something that we had covered. In case of data theft, little kids' information is getting stolen, and how bad can it get?
It can get so bad that they have a horrible credit rating. It could be a child who at 5 years old, their data is stolen, their identity is stolen. They don't find out till they're 18. They go to apply for a credit card, a bank account, whatever. And all of a sudden they could have a mortgage in their name that somebody took out. So, parents don't think to do a credit report on a 5-year-old, but if you have a young child, you might want to do it because you just never know when this data might have been stolen.
But one of the problems trickling from that is not just that they have bad credit, it's that they're ready to file bankruptcy at 18 and had no idea. Like,
that's right.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, and also be aware of support that might be out there. I know a lot of homeowner insurance has identity theft restoration services with there. So, look to see, or AAA, your car insurance may have that too. So look to see what's available so that, don't worry alone, find a professional, and you may already have the service available in some other insurance that you have.
I think that's it. So yeah, I think we're done with the Q&A. We're done with the panel session. So once again, thank you so much, for the audience for joining this session. Thank you guys for, being a part of this panel. It's been a really, given we're covering the educational industry, it's been quite a educational panel. Again, before we leave, any last words,
I had a great time presenting. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to meet everyone and to sit amongst such educated professionals in their own right in respective areas. And I had a great time contributing with everyone. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate that as well. And for those of you who are listening, just think about what you've learned and apply to your personal life as well as your professional life, and talk to your mothers and your fathers and talk to your kids too.
I would say for anyone who's maybe interested in getting into this field, and no offense to computer science majors or engineering majors, you don't have to have that background to be in this. For a lot of humanities or even no degree. So don't think that you have to reach a certain degree to be in here.
Yeah, I would just add, first, apologies for the bad connection, but two is there are so many resources.
Oh.
I feel terrible for laughing, but
well, thank you, Diana, for being here.
I'm just gonna be nice and I'm just gonna wait for her. But if she doesn't show up in a while, I think it's safe to say we can wind up the session, right?
Oh, Diana.
I think she's gone.
Well, I'm pretty sure Diana did have a wonderful session and did have a good time, as everyone on this panel.
Yeah, even the chat is missing from her, so I think she's totally off.
Remember the digital slide. Hey.
Yeah. I swear Canada has good Wi-Fi everywhere, just not here.
She's back. So again, like Diana, again, coming with a bang and leaving with a bang, right, Diana? So again, any final words before ending the session?
Oh no.
No words. Oh. Well, I think if that's the case, it's safe to say thank you everyone for joining the session. Yeah, I guess that's all, folks. Have a wonderful day ahead. And again, once again, thank you for joining our panel, and hope you guys have a great day as well. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you.